A widow steps off the train with 3 children and a folded deed. But the land her husband died for is already claimed by a powerful stranger. In a town where bells toll like verdicts and justice is bought in gold, the question is simple. Will she lose everything, or uncover the secret that could change her fate? The depot bell struck 9 when Sarah Whitmore stepped from the westbound coach, her 3 children pressed against her black wool skirt like sparrows in a storm. The brass gate to Millfield's passenger platform stood locked, though she could see the station master's lamp burning yellow in the window beyond. "Mama, I'm cold," whispered Emma, her youngest, tugging at the folded homestead deed Sarah kept tucked in her coat pocket. "Hush now." Sarah shifted baby Thomas higher on her hip and counted the coins in her reticule, $4.37, enough for supper and a room if she could find one. The spring wind cut across the Dakota prairie with winter's last teeth, and storm clouds gathered black against the evening sky. A man emerged from the station house, tall and weathered, wearing a railroad conductor's cap. He carried a ring of keys that jangled with each step across the wooden planks. "Mrs. Whitmore?" He stopped before the gate. "I'm Ben Curtis, depot agent. Got word you were coming on the evening run." Sarah nodded, studying his face in the lamplight. "My husband wrote that someone would meet us." "But James—" She couldn't finish. The telegram from the territorial marshal, still crumpled in her other pocket, told the story, "Claim jumpers. A fight. A grave she'd never seen." Ben Curtis turned the key in the brass lock. The gate swung open with a creak that sounded like home. The wind howled through gaps in the boarding-house walls as Sarah tucked her children into the narrow bed they'd share for the night. Mrs. Kowalski, the Polish proprietress, had taken pity and charged only 50 cents for the room, but Sarah felt each quarter like a stone in her stomach. "Tell us about Papa's farm," said Michael, her 7-year-old, his eyes bright in the lamplight. Sarah smoothed the homestead papers across her lap. 160 acres of good prairie soil. A cabin with 2 rooms and a well that runs sweet. She'd memorized James's letters, though she'd never seen the place herself. And chickens, red hens that lay eggs big as your fist. Emma giggled despite her weariness. "Can I name them?" "Everyone." Sarah folded the papers back into her coat. Outside, she heard the night train's whistle, long and mournful across the plains. The depot bell chimed 10 o'clock. One day closer to spring, though the April storm still raged beyond the frosted window glass. At dawn, Ben Curtis knocked at their door with news that struck like lightning. "Your husband's claim has been disputed," he said, hat in his hands. "County records show 2 deeds filed for the same quarter section. Matters gone to the territorial judge in Rapid City." Sarah's world tilted. "That's impossible. James filed 3 years ago." "I'm sorry, ma'am. Judge Patterson's hearing both sides next Monday. You'll need to present your case." He shifted his weight from one boot to the other. "Meantime, you've nowhere to stay." The homestead papers felt suddenly fragile in Sarah's hands, like autumn leaves that might crumble at a touch. The general store smelled of coffee beans and coal oil when Sarah pushed through the door, her children trailing behind. She needed supplies for the journey to Rapid City, but her remaining $3 wouldn't stretch far. "Help you, ma'am?" The merchant, a round man with spectacles, looked up from his ledger book. Sarah placed a small wooden box on the counter, her sewing kit, the only thing of value she owned. "I'd like to trade this for travel provisions." The man examined the ivory thimble and pearl-handled scissors. "Quality work. I can give you $2 credit. Not enough for coach fare, but sufficient for hardtack and jerked beef." Sarah nodded and watched him count out the goods. The depot bell struck 11 as they returned to the platform. Ben Curtis stood beside the telegraph key, his face grim. "Wire from Rapid City," he said. "Judge Patterson sick with pneumonia. Courts postponed indefinite." Sarah sank onto a bench, Thomas growing heavy in her arms. "What do we do now?" Michael tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, look." A woman approached across the platform, her grey hair pinned neat beneath a blue bonnet. She carried a leather medical bag and wore the practical dress of a frontier midwife. "I'm Anna Pedersen," she said, setting her bag at Sarah's feet. "Heard you folks might need assistance." The morning sun broke through the storm clouds, warming Sarah's face for the first time in weeks. Ben Curtis checked his pocket watch. Eastbound's due at past. If you're heading back— "We're not," Sarah said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. "This is our home now. We'll make our stand here." Anna smiled and lifted her bag. "Then you'll need a place to light while you sort things out." Anna's cabin sat 2 miles from town, surrounded by a kitchen garden that spoke of years tending this patch of prairie. She led them through the wooden gate and up the stone path, her keys singing against her hip. "Lost my own husband 2 winters past," she said, pushing open the door. "Got room for more souls who need sheltering." The cabin held the warmth of beeswax candles and dried herbs hanging from the rafters. Emma ran her fingers along a quilt stretched across the main room, 9-patch pattern in blue and yellow calico. "That's my wedding quilt," Anna said. "Made it when I was no older than you." "It's beautiful," Sarah whispered. "Beauty's in the making, not the thing itself." Anna hung her bonnet on a peg by the door. "You know needlework?" Sarah nodded. Her mother had taught her every stitch before she died. "Then you'll earn your keep. Ladies in town pay good money for fine sewing, and my eyes aren't what they used to be." That evening, Sarah sat by lamplight, her needle flashing through a christening gown for the banker's new grandson. Thomas slept in her lap, while Michael and Emma played quiet games on the cabin floor. Anna rocked by the fire, mending a torn shirt with steady hands. "Your husband's claim you seen the land yourself?" "Only in my dreams," Sarah said. "James wrote that it borders Willow Creek, with timber for building and grass for grazing. I know the spot. Good earth, if it's truly yours to hold." The needle paused in Sarah's hands. "If?" Anna's rocking chair creaked a slow rhythm. "Claims get jumped when folks think nobody's watching. But the land remembers who loved it first." Outside, a coyote called across the prairie darkness, wild and lonesome as a prayer. 3 days later, Sarah stood in the courthouse at Millfield, her hands trembling as she faced Judge Patterson, finally recovered from his illness. The courtroom smelled of tobacco and old leather, and every seat was filled with curious townspeople, drawn by the spectacle of a widow fighting for her dead husband's dream. "State your business, Mrs. Whitmore," the judge said, his voice carrying the weight of territorial law. Sarah unfolded the homestead papers, the creases worn soft from handling. "My husband James filed claim to the southwest quarter of Section 12 3 years past. We have the deed and proof of improvements." From across the aisle, a voice cut sharp as winter wind. "That land belongs to me." Sarah turned to see a man in an expensive suit, his silver watch chain gleaming in the afternoon light. Cyrus Blackwood, she'd heard his name whispered in the boarding-house. Railroad money, cattle money, money that bought judges and juries when the law proved inconvenient. "Mr. Blackwood filed his claim 4 days ago," the judge said, consulting his papers. "But Mrs. Whitmore's predates his by 3 years. Filed under a dead man's name," Blackwood's lawyer interjected. "The claim's invalid." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She hadn't considered that James's death might void their homestead rights. The courthouse clock chimed 3 as Judge Patterson studied both sets of papers. Outside, thunder rolled across the prairie, promising another spring storm. "I'll hear testimony from both parties," the judge declared. "Court reconvenes tomorrow at 9 sharp." That evening Anna found Sarah pacing the cabin floor, her children long asleep. The christening gown lay forgotten on the table, needle still trailing thread. "Heard about today's proceedings," Anna said quietly. "Whole town's talking. He's going to take our land." Sarah's voice broke on the words. "James died for nothing." Anna moved to the window, gazing out at the storm clouds gathering black against the stars. "Your husband wrote you letters about that claim. Did he ever mention finding anything unusual on the property?" "Unusual how? Old homestead foundation, maybe? Indian markers? Something that would prove the land was settled before either claim." Sarah shook her head. "Only that he built near the creek, on the highest ground." Anna was quiet for a long moment. "Might be worth a look, if you had the courage for it." Lightning split the sky, illuminating the prairie in stark white relief. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Ben Curtis burst into Anna's cabin just after sunrise, still wearing his nightshirt beneath his coat. "Telegram from the territorial capital," he panted. "Railroads announced plans for a spur line through Willow Creek. Land values just doubled overnight." Sarah felt her heart sink. "That's why Blackwood wants the property." "Gets worse," Ben continued. "Judge Patterson rode out before dawn. Left word he's been called to Pierre on urgent business." "Convenient," Anna muttered, setting coffee on the table. "Blackwood's money reaches farther than most folks reckon." Sarah stared at the homestead papers, her last connection to James and his dreams. Without a judge to hear her case, Blackwood could file adverse possession and claim the land had been abandoned. "Mama?" Michael appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Are we going home today?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. Home, a place that existed only in James's letters and her own desperate hopes. "I don't know, sweetheart." Anna stood suddenly, her chair scraping against the wooden floor. "Maybe it's time to stop waiting for other folks to solve our problems." She moved to a trunk beneath the window and drew out a surveyor's chain and compass, the brass fittings polished bright. "My late husband was a territorial surveyor," she explained. "If your James built on that land and made improvements, there'll be evidence. Might be we can find proof that trumps any court proceedings." Sarah lifted Thomas into her arms, feeling the weight of decision pressing down like storm clouds. "It's 20 miles to Willow Creek through country I've never seen." "I know the way," Anna said simply, "and I know the law. If we can document prior settlement, Blackwood's claim won't hold water." The depot bell chimed 8 o'clock in the distance, marking another hour closer to losing everything James had worked to build. By noon, they'd traveled 15 miles across rolling prairie, Anna's surveyor tools rattling in the wagon bed alongside provisions for the children. The storm had blown itself out during the night, leaving the air clean and sharp with the scent of new grass. "There," Anna pointed ahead to a line of cottonwoods marking the creek. "Your husband chose well. High ground, good water, timber for fuel." Sarah's pulse quickened as they approached the homestead site. She could see the cabin now, small and weathered but solid, with a kitchen garden plot still visible beneath last year's weeds. Michael and Emma ran ahead, their voices bright with excitement. "Mama, look, there's the well Papa wrote about." But it was Thomas who made the discovery that changed everything. Toddling behind his siblings, he stopped beside a pile of fieldstones that had once formed a foundation. His chubby fingers closed around something metallic, half buried in the dirt. "What's that, baby?" Sarah knelt beside him as he held up his prize, a brass surveyor's marker, green with age. Anna examined it with trembling hands. "Property corner. This stone foundation predates any recent claim by 20 years or more." Sarah felt her breath catch. "What does that mean?" "Means this land was homesteaded before, then abandoned. Your husband's claim supersedes Blackwood's because he actually settled and improved the property." Anna's eyes shone with something like victory. "But we need to document everything proper." They spent the afternoon measuring and recording, Anna's surveyor skills proving invaluable as she mapped the old foundation against James's cabin. The evidence was clear: 2 separate periods of settlement, with James's improvements built directly over the earlier homestead site. "Continuity of use," Anna explained as she sketched the layout in her field book. "Legal principle that protects legitimate settlers against speculative claims." As the sun settled toward the western horizon, painting the prairie gold, Sarah stood in the doorway of her husband's cabin. It was smaller than she'd imagined, rougher, but it had been built with love and hope for a future he'd never live to see. "Mama, can we stay here tonight?" Emma asked, tugging at her skirt. Sarah looked back toward town, then at the children who'd already claimed corners of the cabin as their own. 20 miles through gathering dusk, with 3 tired children and crucial evidence that needed protecting. "We'll stay," she decided. "This is our home now." The wind picked up as darkness fell, setting the cottonwoods to whispering beside the creek. Sarah lit the oil lamp James had left on the kitchen table and gathered her children close, reading to them from the only book they owned, a collection of Bible stories her mother had given her as a wedding gift. And the stranger was welcomed. She read aloud, and given shelter and provision, for hospitality to travellers brings unexpected blessings. Michael looked up from where he lay on a pallet beside the fire. "Like Mrs. Paterson helping us?" "Exactly like that," Sarah said, smoothing his hair. Outside, something moved in the darkness beyond the window glass. Sarah froze, her hand tightening on the Bible. "Stay here," she whispered to the children, moving quietly to peer through the curtain. 3 riders sat their horses just beyond the circle of lamplight, their faces hidden beneath hat brims. She recognized Blackwood's voice when he called out, "Mrs. Whitmore, we need to have words." Anna appeared at Sarah's shoulder, carrying the double-barreled shotgun that had hung above the cabin's door. "Private property, Mr. Blackwood," Anna called back. "You'll state your business from there." "My business is with the widow. Legal matter that needs settling before sunrise." Sarah felt ice form in her stomach. "What happens at sunrise?" "Adverse possession filing becomes legal at dawn," Anna whispered. "He plans to claim the land was abandoned and take title by occupation." The brass surveyor's marker felt warm in Sarah's palm, where she'd been clutching it like a talisman. Proof of prior settlement. But would it matter if they couldn't get it before a judge? Blackwood's horse stepped closer. "You've got 1 hour to pack whatever you can carry. After that, you're trespassing." "We have prior claim," Sarah called out, her voice stronger than she felt. "Claims filed by dead men don't hold water. Ask any territorial judge." But even as he spoke, Sarah heard something that made her heart leap, the distant sound of a wagon approaching fast across the prairie grass, harness jangles and wheel rattle growing louder by the moment. "You expecting company?" Anna asked. Sarah shook her head, but hope was already building in her chest like sunrise. The wagon swept into the firelight, and Ben Curtis jumped down from the driver's seat, still wearing his station master's vest. Behind him came 2 other men, one carrying a leather satchel that marked him as legal counsel, the other wearing the silver star of a territorial marshal. "Mr. Blackwood," the marshal called out, "you're under warrant for fraudulent land filing and intimidation of territorial citizens." Sarah watched Blackwood's face change in the lamplight, arrogance cracking like ice in spring thaw. "Marshal Henderson, I wasn't expecting." Telegraph from Pierre came through an hour past. Ben Curtis interrupted, waving a yellow paper. "Judge Patterson's ruling on the Whitmore claim. Prior settlement confirmed. Improvements documented. Homestead rights transferred to the widow and heirs in perpetuity." The legal counsel stepped forward, his satchel gleaming in the lamp's glow. "Mrs. Whitmore, I'm Samuel Wright, territorial prosecutor. We've been investigating Mr. Blackwood's land acquisition practices for the past 6 months. Your case provided the evidence we needed." Sarah felt the world tilt back toward rightness, like a scale finding its balance. Blackwood gathered his reins, his voice tight with defeat. "This isn't finished." "Yes, it is," Marshal Henderson said quietly. "You'll surrender any documents related to this claim and consider yourself fortunate we're not charging you with attempted theft." The 3 riders melted back into the prairie darkness, leaving only the sound of hoofbeats fading towards town. Ben Curtis approached the cabin door, his face creased with something between exhaustion and joy. "Mrs. Whitmore, I owe you an explanation. When Anna sent word about what you'd found here, I wired the territorial office direct. Seems they've been watching Blackwood's railroad connections for months, waiting for him to overplay his hand." Anna leaned the shotgun against the doorframe and smiled. "Sometimes justice needs a little helping along." Sarah looked around at the faces gathered in her lamplight, Ben Curtis, who'd opened the first gate, Anna, who'd offered shelter, Marshal Henderson, who'd enforced the law, and her 3 children who'd traveled so far to find home. "How can I ever repay such kindness?" "No debt owed," Anna said simply. "Folks help folks out here. That's how we all survive the prairie." As the officials prepared to return to town, Ben Curtis pressed something into Sarah's palm, a brass key that caught the firelight like a promise. "For your gate," he said. "Every homestead needs proper boundaries." 3 months later, Sarah stood in the same doorway watching Emma chase red hens through the kitchen garden, while Michael helped Thomas stack stones by the creek. The surveyor's marker now sat on the mantelpiece beside James's last letter, 2 pieces of brass that had saved their home. Anna approached up the path, carrying her medical bag and wearing the satisfied expression of a woman whose work was done. "Mrs. Patterson's baby came easy," she announced. "Healthy boy, 10 fingers and 10 toes. "Any word from town?" Sarah asked, hanging Anna's bonnet on the peg James had carved beside the door. "Ben Curtis says the railroads bought land 2 sections over. Blackwood's in territorial prison, and Judge Patterson's back on the bench with a clean slate." Anna settled into the rocking chair Sarah had bought with her sewing money. "Your needlework business is thriving, I hear." Sarah nodded toward the basket of finished garments waiting for delivery. "Orders coming faster than I can fill them. Good problem to have." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the children play in the golden afternoon light. The gate Sarah had built around the garden stood open, welcoming whatever blessings the prairie might bring. "Do you ever regret it?" Anna asked. "Staying when you could have returned east to family?" Sarah considered the question, her hand moving instinctively to the homestead deed now safely filed in the county records. "James used to write that home isn't a place you find, it's a place you make. I think I finally understand what he meant." A meadowlark called from the cottonwoods, its song bright and clear as promise itself. In the distance the evening train whistled its passage toward towns and territories still waiting to be built. Emma ran to the porch, her apron full of speckled eggs. "Mama, look what the red hens gave us." "Beautiful," Sarah said, gathering her youngest into her arms. "Just like everything else we've been given." The sun touched the western horizon, painting the cabin and garden and rolling prairie in shades of gold that would last until tomorrow brought its own gifts of light and possibility. As darkness settled over the homestead, Sarah lit the oil lamp and opened her Bible to read the evening story. But tonight she found herself telling a different tale about a widow and 3 children who'd waited at a gate until a stranger opened it and led them home to themselves. The prairie wind sang through the cottonwoods, carrying the scent of new grass and the promise of rain. In the distance, a coyote called, not lonesome now, but wild and free as the country that had chosen to shelter them. If you'd like more stories like this, stay a while, I'll tell the next one tomorrow night.